Real is back.
Mic check. Man, we are officially back. We are live again. Welcome to Kickin, the Real podcast. I am your host, Andy Diosa. If you're a first-time listener, thank you for being here. If you're a multiple-time listener, thank you for being here. I know I was gone for a while, but things happen, birthdays, holidays, and MLS Cup playoffs just seem like they're forever. So I just wanted to let the playoffs run and get to the final, and then obviously have the nice episode to recap everything that happened in the MLS Cup final and a little bit in the season. So I couldn't think of a better way to do it. Put a bow on the season. Got a legend in the building with me today who happened to just be so kind to join us here in LA for MLS Cup final by way of South Florida, by way of New York. But yeah, we got my boy David Goss in the building today. We're gonna break all things down. My brother Goss, thanks for coming through to kick with me. How you feeling, man?
Feeling great, man. We hung out in person in LA, which is always the best. Now we'll do a digital one for everyone. Our in-person one's not acceptable to be released as podcast, but now we could do the professional one.
If we had some hot mics over the weekend, man, that would have been grade A content for sure. Dave, you were here, man. I obviously want to get into a lot of different things. So I'll start with the way I start the podcast with everybody, and then we'll jump right into MLS Cup. It's just the origin story to give the listeners a little bit of a background. If you're familiar with the MLS space, you know who Dave is. He's been around for forever, and you know the voice. Who was it that said it? Vanny or Sando said it over the weekend. Like, I know the voice. He was looking for you in the press conference. So
yeah, I think it was Greg Vanny.
Yeah, so it's a voice that if you're familiar with the space, you've heard and you recognize, and if you're not, then you'll be able to learn and get some insight for this episode. But I like to start with the origin story and just kind of let people know what that was to get into sports media, how that started for you.
I think it started in high school when I realized I wasn't good enough to play. I think a lot of us have that experience, and but I still want to be around this. I still like it. And I started to get, all the books of the great calls of all time and the best sports moments of all time. And you start to get, engaged with it and enthralled. High school radio, and then into college where, for me, it was big. I went to Northeastern in Boston, where obviously very well. And I think starting sophomore year, I broadcast every men's and women's college soccer game at Northeastern. And super lucky, right? We're a school that's not good at sports, but we had an HD broadcast. So I got to work on really high level stuff without the competition of everyone wanting to be a part of it. And I ended up interning on the broadcast team for the Boston Celtics for a season as well, and a bunch of other stuff. And then I was a listener to a podcast called Extra Time Radio at MLS. And so I applied for an internship at some point, and they were like, actually, we're looking for more of a producer paid position. And I was like, well, that sounds better than an internship, and started that way and started to work my way on, continued calling soccer games, all around. I've called NWSL, USL, CONCACAF matches. I think I called a NISA game or whatever it was at the time at some point. College soccer, all up and down. Youth soccer, a ton of what I do, and continuing to add to it. But I'd become a bit of a hardcore soccer fan in middle school and high school, just kind of stumbled into it. And so then that kind of always fused together. I love basketball. I'm a Jets fan. It sucks. I'm a Mets fan, which I love, but I always wanted to work in soccer specifically and try and grow it and make it more than what I thought it could be. And, connect to people like me who were looking for a way to cover it or a way to follow it and didn't feel like it was covered the way other sports were that they followed in this country, and then try to help bring new people in. So that's what I've been trying to do since.
I love it, man, because especially with MLS and the landscape of soccer in this country, everybody's story is very unique and very different, but you almost are able to see individuals grow with the sport itself and grow within moments and grow within different iterations of the league, like we like to call it. So it's just cool to see and have reference points of people that you listen to, years back, or even former players, which I know is always cool for people to I used to watch Taylor in New England and then see him be on all these broadcasts and see him be on all these shows and have his own podcast. It's just a cool little ecosystem in MLS in general. And it's just fun to be a part of and be able to kind of just literally, my favorite thing is just to talk to people, obviously. And there's an amount of knowledge that people have, but it's more so just enjoy and be able to, like I mentioned, grow a little bit with the league and the sport as it's happening. Now, your current venture right now, it's Soccerwise, and I want to give you the floor to kind of explain that platform and what you have going there, because like I told you over the weekend, big fan, and I enjoy what you guys got going on there. But let the people know where that came from, how it started, and kind of what the focus is for you guys.
Yeah, it started kind of out of nowhere. Just kind of having an idea of could we cover the leagues in this country from an independent point of view more heavily than the way it is. And as much as some stuff has gotten better, and as you talked about, some people retiring and building things and all of that, there's also a huge gap. I think we all know that, right? I think we're seeing it from the number we're hearing from MLS Cup. Obviously, that's just on linear TV, but for only 420,000 people to be watching MLS Cup, like there's not enough. So that was one of the ideas. Myself and Tom were passionate about doing one on the MLS side that was independent and an opportunity to sort of cover anything we wanted, any way we wanted to. And for myself, I've always loved NWSL and wanted to get into covering it as a job more. And a friend of mine, Jordan Angeli, is one of the best covering that league. She covered MLS for a while, so a lot of people know her name from there. And now she's one of the broadcasters at NWSL. So it all kind of came together, perfect storm, perfect time. And we sort of put it together as one network so that the shows could support each other. And my idea and my thought is people are soccer fans here in this country, and that's what we're trying to cover, whether it's men's or women's, first division, lower division, cups, whatever. I think all of the connecting tissue for all of us is the sport in this region. And so that's what we're trying to build. And that's where it started. And it kind of happened on the fly. So still, putting together a lot of still dotting I's and crossing T's every single day. But we put together a pretty good staple of shows, I think. And in the end, we ended up pretty much doing 5 shows a week across interviews, mailbag episodes, MLS, coverage shows, national team, all that type of stuff. And so we're going to have some cool interviews that are going to come out over the holidays to fill some time. And then we're going to be right back into it. Just trying to be a place for this sport to be covered. As I said, as a sports fan, right? The Knicks just lost potentially. I want to throw on WFAN, right? I want to hear people yelling. I want to hear people complaining. Then I want to wake up in the morning and hear about what's the future and what's next. I didn't feel like soccer has ever had that in this country. So that was sort of the idea of what I want to build and what we're working on.
I love the vision behind that and that comparison. And I think one of my favorite things has been the frequency. Like it's hard to be able to maintain and actually stick to a schedule and say, hey, we're gonna put this out there these days and we watch, and you guys have done a great job doing so. Shout out to Tom, who was the first guest on this podcast for
nice.
the MLS preview. And now you're the guest for the MLS season recap, which is not planned that way, but things just happen. But yeah, and I had Joe Lowry, shout out to Joe on the last show. And it's just like cool to see how many people independently have started a lot of different things. And it's not just starting, it's actually sustaining it and bringing out good knowledge and bringing out good content. And there's definitely, like you mentioned, a gap for all of that. And there continues to be. So I'm happy, obviously proud to see that happening and always have a space to go and check out and different things to read and different things to consume. So it's great, man. Keep doing it. I'll make sure all the Soccerwise stuff is tagged in the YouTube description, all that. People definitely tap in. If you want to act smart and think like you're smart about MLS, this is where you got to go, man. But all right, let's stop prolonging MLS Cup, man. It was a time, and we talked about a lot prior to the game, like what the expectation was going to be around the match. And Red Bulls getting there as a 7th seed is a little bit like, whatever. The Galaxy obviously were the favorite, the whole underdog thing, but we kind of mentioned on Friday, like this game actually might be better than some people might think it is. And it kind of lived up to that. And it was just weird because you get off to that quick start, Galaxy just shoot out and score those 2 early goals. But the Red Bulls responded really well. And I think throughout the game, they really grew into it. They played well. I mean, I know you guys were talking on the recap episode as well. Like it felt like they were going to score that equalizer and it was going to go into extra time or whatever. So for me, it was like props to both sides. But I just think the spectacle was the one thing that really delivered. And obviously Galaxy fans after the year they had last year really wanted to show something and get back to that point. And they did. And congrats to them getting to that mountaintop. But it was a spectacle more so seeing the Red Bulls fans. Getting up to the stadium, I saw them in the parking lot. Getting in the stadium, they're up there crowded up early. And it's like you mentioned, it's kind of just like a beautiful picture of what the soccer landscape basically is, and in this league, and having it be 2 teams, original MLS squads from 96 that have that history and different things of that nature. So before we talk about the actual game, what was the spectacle like for you being here in LA, your favorite city in the world?
Yeah, for sure. You heard me complain about LA a lot this weekend, but this was special. This was cool. This was why Dignity Health Sports, when it was Home Depot Center, was the home for MLS Cup, right? Because LA is a soccer market and there's a soccer heartbeat to the city. And at a time when MLS didn't really exist and wasn't being talked about, the Galaxy were relevant. And even if the Galaxy weren't going to be in that game, you knew that there were soccer fans in the area. And I think that's what you felt on Saturday, was like an energy for being in the center of this and being at the moment, which is what you feel at a Super Bowl and an NBA Finals, but sometimes you don't feel when it's a US Open Cup or a soccer championship in this country. And I think I did in that whole, experience of pulling up to the game, and it's just Galaxy jerseys everywhere, but it's not just Ricky Poo's jerseys, right? Like you're seeing Carlos Pavone jerseys. I saw a Steven Gerrard jersey, which made me crack up. There's just like, all the El Salvador jerseys on their own. And then you've got Mexico jerseys and all that. Like you sort of see the fabric of it all. And then, as you said, the Red Bull fans, over 2,000 fans traveling cross country, the club providing some support on that financially, which is awesome. And that's what you want to see. And, I think I felt good for those fans, because I want being a fan of an MLS team to be easy. Like fans in Seattle, all the things I talked about of like, oh, I want to have sports talk radio, I want to have people talking about the game, that happens in Seattle. So when Seattle wins, it's great because the city believes in the team and supports the team. But it's also nice when a former Metro Stars fan who has, drudged through the trash for 2 decades of caring about a team that sucks, going to empty stadiums, talking about a team none of their friends care about, none of their family care about. It's cool then to be rewarded with this moment of being in a sold out stadium on, international television with superstars on the field and feeling like your team is at the level and has the opportunity. So I completely agree with you. I thought the event was special. It felt big. It felt loud, but it felt very LA Galaxy. And that was really cool for me because I've watched a lot of that history from afar. Like I'm an East Coast person. I'd never been to an MLS Cup at this stadium. When I started working at MLS, the last 2, I think, were there, but I didn't go to them. And so I had never seen, I had seen Keane and Donovan and all this stuff and Clint Mathis and all, of course, RSL beating them and like all those things from afar. I'd never seen it in person. So it was really special, I think, for me, sort of full circle moment to be like, this was the MLS that I found at first, and this was the one I was excited about. And now for it to now sort of come back to life was really cool.
Yeah. And I think the pregame, the moment that I was just like, man, this is a big, I mean, obviously everything going on was amazing, but seeing BWP and Landon Donovan walking out like with the trophy before the game, I'm like, this is like what you think about when you used to watch MLS and players of that nature representing the teams that they used to play for. I'm like, wow, like this is almost like so much of a full circle moment. Not even to mention like Greg Vandy's history with the Galaxy himself, losing 3 MLS Cup finals as a player, and then his coaching staff having ties there as well. So it was just cool, just kind of soaking that all in. And then we didn't really have time to do that because the game got up to such a fast start. And before we turned, there was already 2-0, and the Red Bulls looking like they were in for a long day, but they were able to fight back. And just like, I think that first half hour was just like an eye-opening experience of seeing like this game might just be wide open the whole time. You see the second goal going here, like, it's going to be over. Like, this is about to be another 5-0. So, like, Galaxy going to run away with it. But the Red Bull, like I mentioned, they fought. And it's really what they kind of did all postseason. And there's obviously 2 factors on for the game for me. Obviously, Ricky Pooch not being able to play. But I think that's just more credit to how the Galaxy got it done. And then the Andres Reyes thing, which just is crazy. Him being that late scratch, getting sick and not being able to play, which I guess had more of an effect than people might have noticed, especially in those first 2 goals, how quick they happen and the step in of Noah and different things like that. But what is your breakdown? What sensations did the game leave you in terms of both sides, the Galaxy getting it done and the Red Bulls putting up that fight?
I think on the Galaxy side, those first 12 minutes are everything they've tried to build, right? Which is, we're going to open it up and there's opportunity for you, but like we're lethal. And I think when you go into a final, pretty much any final, you're always excited. You're always hyped up. We're talking about it for weeks. And then you get 10 minutes into game, you realize, teams are scared. Like finals are always bad games. That's just the reality of a final. I was at the NWSL final a few weeks ago. Awesome, tight, but there was like 4 shots on goal. You think of World Cup finals, you think of Champions League finals, like teams are scared to lose. The Galaxy hadn't been that. And so the first question was, well, would they be able to do it on the biggest stage? They did it in a Western Conference Finals, sort of, but that Seattle game wasn't the same. And they did it in the opening of the playoffs. Colorado Rapids in a 3-game series. Like, come on, that's not the same thing. Right. So I think that was the first question. We got that answer quickly. They exploded. Painstill, Peck, Mark Delgado looked good. Brugman obviously looked awesome. Joveljic with the finish. Like, okay, the Galaxy came to play. They came to play their soccer. And then, as you said, the Andres Reyes thing, it was a personnel issue. Like, Andres Reyes is a really good center back. That's why he was starting in the team. He has now been traded 3 days later, which is like going to be part of the ESPN 30 for 30 about this club, of just like all the stuff they do, which is bizarre and has nothing to do with this game, I am sure. But it's still a ridiculous way for this week to end for him. So it's a personnel issue, but I think the biggest problem was just like how late it happened. And so now you've got a guy in Noah Aile who's a kid new to this league that you're asking to step into the most central position of your back line. And it clearly threw everyone else off. Stroud made mistakes. Sean Nealis made mistakes. Dylan Nealis made mistakes. And Red Bulls played on their heels. And they said that post-game. Like, they were reacting to the Galaxy for the first 20 minutes. Then they swapped positions a little. They slid Isla out wide, made them a little more secure. They get the goal on the free kick. And I don't know that I've ever seen an MLS Cup shift that much. Normally, MLS Cups, if they're close games, they're both in the same sort of realm. And yeah, we have our 5 minutes and you have your 5 minutes. But I don't think I've ever seen one where you could look at each other like we did in the press box and say, oh, this game's over 15 minutes in, to 30 minutes later saying, I think the Red Bulls are going to win this game. I've never seen that big of a shift in an MLS Cup final. And so I think it's credit to the Red Bulls and shows, I think, to me, the most that they deserve to be there, even though they were a 7 seed, that they are a different team today than they were 3 months ago. And that's why. And I think it's also a credit to Galaxy for having that high and then still being able to come down and maintain enough of a performance to sneak out with the win.
Yeah, I think it's important what you mentioned off the top is like the game itself. Like, you thought maybe people were going to go into it a little hesitant, but it was back and forth, and there were chances on both sides throughout the match. It wasn't really any lulls that you were like, this game is kind of boring me. Like, it was open and good action throughout. And to that point, for me, for the Red Bull, and it's what we talk about a lot in MLS, is like sometimes you just don't have the same talent as the other team.
Yeah.
Even in that biggest stage, even in those moments, like 1 or 2 bounces go a different way and you get an equalizer, and now you're like, okay, maybe this could be something. So sure, it's more so to the fight of what Sandro Schwartz was able to do there. And those kids, man, that Jersey mentality that everybody's talking about, they were like, let's just go play and have no fear, which is great. And to me, on the Galaxy side, I was so impressed. And I don't know if you thought about this as well. Like, when you think about finals, a lot of times let's talk about Leagues Cup, like where you're talking about the crew and you're like, all right, Cucho has to do something, or Diego Rossi has to do something. To me, this might have been the Galaxy's most all-around performance of the season. They had a great year. They didn't lose in that building all season, but you could literally go through the starting lineup and name a player and name a moment in that game.
Yeah.
And that was the opposite of what we were thinking of when Ricky got hurt. It's like, who's going to step up for Ricky? And they all did. And I didn't think that was going to happen. I didn't think Brugman was going to start. I don't think anybody thought Brugman was going to start. Then he pulled that one out, and it was I don't want to say it was a risky move. It was a big move. And he responded. He wins MVP. He has a great game. And you could go across the board. Like I said, I think Garces was great. I think Mickey Yamane had his moments. I mean, they all did, but that's just the Galaxy team and how they were this year. And to me, the most important part of that whole equation is still Greg Vanney, because I know a lot of times we like to take the pulse of the fans, and fans are so rational online and they never say anything crazy. But there was a lot of Greg Vanney chatter over the years here in LA, and it was very weird to me how people were starting to kind of shift. And I mean, it happens a lot with every coach and all that, but this is the team that they wanted to put together. Wingers, it's just his system. You know what it was.
Yeah.
And once it finally started rolling, they just were a freight train. And it wasn't like, all right, they had a little bit of a bad spot in the season. Like, they were just going at it all year. Them and losing on decision day might have been the best thing that happened to them. And I think them going into the playoffs with that kind of hit, Mario Yoshida was like, this will never happen to us again. It's like the Galaxy, what you would expect from them from the past. And they finally put it all together. But I was just so impressed by the group collective. And you talk about somebody like Edwin Cerrillo, who I think might have been one of their most important players the whole season, who doesn't even get that much shine, because you have Peg Painter going crazy when Ricky was on the field. Obviously, you know what he does. But how do you think the Galaxy kind of just bounced back? And I know it's a roster construction thing, and I know Will Kuntz deserves all the credit in the world. I mean, I know there's a lot of trophies out front, but if there's room for some more, Will should probably get one, because this is a pat on the back to what he was able to do. But talk to me a little bit about that redemption for them, because that's literally what this was, and they did it in a really good way.
Yeah, when you talk about that roster and how everyone stepped up in the final, it does reckon back to the great teams for the LA Galaxy, which is, you're going to talk about Landon and Robbie Keane and David Beckham, but they were always teams that didn't have a weak link. And so often, especially in MLS, in a salary cap league where it's hard to afford to put together a 15, 16 person roster of players that you can trust in big moments, very often you've got elite talent, but then the losing team, you'll look at it and say, well, it was actually the weak link that let us down, right? Whether it's at center back or defensive mid or at goalkeeper or for some teams, lack of finisher. Like, it's really hard to build a full roster. The Galaxy in the past had done that. Even in the times when you were looking at international superstars coming in and all of that, there was still the Sean Franklins of the world and Omar Gonzalez and AJ De La Garza who came through the draft, and Giassi Zardes, who was a homegrown, like guys like that. And the Galaxy had fallen away from that for a really long time. And I think partially that was because the organization was kind of managed by very specific individuals, and there wasn't enough of a group think around to say like, oh, this player could be good. It was very much like one or two people just calling the shots, which is never going to work. Like, you need to have a process. You can't just pick talent that you think makes sense. So I think that was part of it. And I think the other part of it was the Galaxy didn't define who they were. And so it's really hard to bring talent in and have them be comfortable and play well if you don't really know what you're asking of them. And so you could look for quote unquote talent, which is generic, or you could say, yeah, we're a possession-based team. Let's go find guys who can play in that. Garces, I think, is a great example. I don't know that Garces is a starting center back for every team in MLS. He doesn't win headers. He's not super physical, but he loves to cover ground. He's comfortable in open space, defending 1v1, and he's super comfortable in possession. So boom, he's an LA Galaxy center back, but he's not a center back for everyone. And I think that's what you saw in this Galaxy roster top to bottom. And so when you're in your toughest moments, then everyone has something to lean back on, which is like their soccer DNA. Who am I as a player at my core? Things are panicked. Things are hectic. All right, I'm going to play simple. And for some players, playing simple means play long and play physical. And for others, it means get the ball at our feet and let's move it and let's play. And that's who the Galaxy are. And they have a roster now that completely fits that. And I think it's why Edwin Cerrillo went from a rotation center mid at FC Dallas to a starter. Because I remember watching Cerrillo his first week in MLS, playing a game with a couple other homegrowns in the Dallas midfield, and they're connecting and knocking the ball around, but no one's ever trying to break a line and no one's getting near a goal. And now he's in the right team where it fits and it makes sense and it works for all of them. Delgado, the same. Obviously for the wingers, the same. John Nelson. I mean, this is a guy who wasn't a starter in MLS a year ago. Now he's starting in an MLS Cup final. So I think once you have that DNA, that identity, it makes it so much easier for players to feel confident, for players to feel comfortable, for there to be this cohesive nature. And I think to bounce back from tough moments and not start to lose yourself as the season goes along. And Will Kuntz is a huge part of that. Will Kuntz is a huge part of identifying the right players and building a process. And a ton of credit to Greg Vanney, because besides just being the coach and putting this all together, he basically stepped down from being the chief soccer officer to just being the head coach under Will Kuntz. Now, it's not his decision, like it was done above him, but not every coach would say yes, and not every coach would handle it correctly. And I think we can both attest to being around how many locker rooms where you'd come outside and you're like, oh, the team's doing so well, and players are like, oh, the coach hates the manager, and the manager, the players hate the coach, and like there's all this like venom and toxicity inside a club that sometimes you don't see from the outside, or other times you do. That's how bad it is. And I think it's a credit to Greg Vanney that wasn't who he was, and his ego wasn't the most important thing. He wanted to bring the LA Galaxy back to where they had been, back to the teams he had played on, for the team, for the region, for all of those things, and for his own career. And I think he really went about it the right way. And so coming out of this, to have won 2 MLS Cups at 2 different clubs and 2 different setups, it's not something we've seen very often. I think it's a huge credit to the coach he's become.
Yeah, that's why I want to make sure Vanney gets his credit, because even all through last season when they had the boycotts and they had all those things going on, he was never shy of saying like, hey, man, we're going through a tough, a really horrible moment, but I'm trying to keep this afloat. And
right.
I'm gonna do what we can. And he was never shying away from that. Like, he was like, this sucks. This is embarrassing. This is kind of a show that we need to improve. And he never shied away from that. And when he finally got the chance to do so, I think it was the way the mental of the team, obviously last year was bad because all the things lingering, but I think the mental of the team this year was prevalent from day one. I still remember Cerrillo getting in Messi's face in that opening game. And I asked him after the game, and he's like, I don't know. I just blacked out. He's like, I don't even know what I said to him. He's like, it was a very memorable moment for me, probably not for him. He's like, but he's like, and just seeing a kid like that, I'm like, yo, these guys have something. Even Painsul, I think it was after the second game, was like, we're going to kill a lot of teams if we play this way. He was saying this early in the season. This is without Peck even getting there or getting going like quickly. And it's like they did everything they set out to do. When coaches say, oh, we want to make this place a fortress and all these things, like, yeah, that's cool. They actually did that. Like, not losing a game at home all season and then winning the cup at home, like everything just kind of culminated in a way, in a redemption way. And then, Greg Vanney is definitely worthy of that. So salute to the Galaxy, salute to the Rebels who like we mentioned, put on a good show and got into the postseason as a 7th seed and went on the road and shocked everybody most of the games. And we're close to doing it again. So it was fun, man. It was a good MLS Cup. It was a great season. I want to touch on a few things throughout the season. We'll try to remember back because I feel like 1,000 things happen in MLS all the time. But, we'll try to wrap that up a little bit. Tell me if you have a favorite moment of the MLS season. It could be on the field. It could be off the field. Anything that you could think of that was your favorite moment. Because I have one specific, and I was just we were watching the video earlier today in the office. Like, Raquinho was probably one of my favorite, like, peak MLS moments where it's just a raccoon running on the field, pauses the game for so long. But I also, like, because the seasons are so long, I was like, this felt like it was 3 years ago. Like,
you just said the Galaxy game, the opener. I forgot that there was temporary refs this year. That doesn't seem like it happened this year. That feels like 5 years ago.
This is nuts. But one on the field one that like I didn't remember till today as well was the Kellen Acosta win goal in Chicago.
Yeah.
Like that. if you want to talk about a peak MLS moment, that was great. If you are not familiar with this Kellen Acosta or the Raquinho, please Google, do your YouTube searches because they are epic, hilarious MLS moments, which is the reason why we love this league, man. It's crazy in its own way.
It is absolutely bizarre. There's a ton of moments that happened over the course of the year. I think pops up first. I mean, a big one, Leagues Cup final, just because maybe even more the CONCACAF Champions Cup final of just like seeing Columbus at their peak because they didn't, they obviously lost in the first round of the playoffs. We don't know what their future looks like, but for these 14 months that they put together, I think it might be the best team I've ever seen in MLS. And so to see them win a couple more things was huge. I think the way they played in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, obviously we found out later they all had the runs, which is its own issue, but they still went out and played soccer. Like they played as the better team in Mexico in a final. They played open, they played aggressive, and those are things that I haven't always seen in my life. And so it's still really exciting for me to see those things happen and then flip it to Leagues Cup final where they take care of business against LAFC once again. And it felt like a real solidifying moment for Nancy and what he has built and what he has done, his ability to do it once again. So I think that stands out to me a ton. I don't think you can get away from Atlanta knocking off Miami. It's just like, it's the beauty of a knockout competition. It's the beauty of playoffs, but it didn't seem possible, right? The idea of the format is better team's going to win more often. The better team's going to win 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. So if we play as close to 10 games as we can, in theory, the better team should always win. Miami are clearly a better team than Atlanta, but Atlanta had belief. They were, super locked in, super connected. I think the second game of that series is an all-timer of just in front of a sold-out Mercedes-Benz, a club sort of revitalized the late goal from Jean de Silva and just like the energy around that. And then the finish of just, I don't know, Tomas Avila's going down, laying with his hand in his face. Atlanta play through it. They score. Brad Guzan's getting pushed into the goal by Luis Suarez. Like, there was just a ton in that one. And I just moved to Miami. So watching that around Inter Miami fans was just like kind of hilarious to see.
Yeah. And once again, it's the moments that like literally solidify MLS. Like, if you're looking from afar watching this league, you're like, yeah, Miami's probably going to run through everybody. Right. And it's crazy to me on the Miami tip quickly. Like, they won Supporters Shield and they had so many injuries this year. Like, I think people forget how many players went down, how many people were injured throughout the season-ending injuries, international breaks, like of all that. And I mean, they still were like, yeah, this is top-notch of talent of the world. And like, of course they're going to be this good. And then the playoff happens and you're like, oh my God, like this is only something you see in MLS. But yeah, and it's the beauty of the league. And to the Columbus point, absolutely agree. The fact that they did it against LAFC again kind of solidified that, like, yeah, because LAFC was kind of that measuring stick at, coming off of the season they did with the MLS Cup. And Columbus was like, we're not only going to beat them in MLS Cup, we're going to run it back and do it again a few months later to win another trophy. That team played incredible soccer throughout that stretch, like you mentioned. It was, I think everybody waxed poetic, and it was definitely deserved because it was amazing to see in MLS and Wilfred Nancy not having any fear and just going at it. And I mean, I don't have to say much about Kucha. He to me, like, I know Messi is Messi, but that was the MVP of the league to me. I know there's different conversations to be had there, but I mean, he was just incredible. Everything
I voted for him. I just
Yeah,
wanted
no,
it out there.
you know how that goes. You know how that goes.
It's all political.
Speaking of teams specifically, is there any team that surprised you the most in a good way that maybe impressed you the most? That maybe besides Columbus that we already mentioned.
Well, the obvious one would be the LA Galaxy. I picked against them last year. I didn't think they were a cohesive unit top to bottom. I didn't think you could win being all possession and all one way. And so I felt that they were stronger this year because of the talent they brought in, but I don't really believe in talent first year. So I'm not gonna say Peck and Painstill are gonna hit year one. I thought Mickey Yamane was a risk. We don't often see a profile of that player brought in at that position for really successful teams. John McCarthy has had some great moments in his career, but there has been a ceiling, and we saw it with LAFC last year. They made it to 3 finals. They lost 3 finals. So the ceiling's pretty high, but it is not elite in getting over the line. And so I thought there was huge question marks about this club. And I think I did a podcast with Joe Larry before the season started. I think he had them second in the West, credit to him. And I had them nowhere close. And so that was one of those that we were debating going back and forth. And I can clearly say that I was completely wrong about that one. And credit to the LA Galaxy for proving me wrong and sticking to their guns and finding their way there. So that's one for me. I think a lot of people will say the Rapids because they're running Leagues Cup. It didn't really continue into MLS, but I think it's promising to see that they, in so far in this offseason already, have kind of figured out, okay, but this is what worked. How can we deepen our roster so that we can sustain across a full year? But I think that's one that would stick out. Orlando had a fall off in the regular season, which is what I expected, but I wouldn't have guessed that they'd make it to an Eastern Conference Finals. And so I actually think they progressed more than I expected this year. We'll see where it goes from here. And the last one would be Minnesota. Minnesota was like exciting at the beginning of the year. It wasn't real. It wasn't sustainable. Then they fell off. They got a new coach. They got a new CSO. And then they brought in some DPs that look for real. And this is the team I think that I'm most excited to see next year, where we often see in MLS a team finish one year and it's not enough time. But then if they can sustain that into the next year, that's like we talked about with the Crew, that's 14 to 18 months of success. And I think Minnesota could be in line for that. And I think Kelvin Yeboah has like star player written all over him.
Yeah, those are good shots on all those teams. I agree with you on Colorado for sure. Chris Armas, and back to the Galaxy thing, I think it's more so a belief of having certain players believe that they could get things done. And we saw that in the Leagues Cup run. Like when they finished that, it was almost like you couldn't tell them anything. And even though they went out the way they did, I remember Chris after that game being like, hey, man, like we were supposed to be one of the worst teams in this competition and we're finishing third or whatever. Like where, this is a good sign to come. And obviously to see if that is able to be sustainable, it's going to be fun to see how they kind of build that out. Definitely Minnesota came on late for sure. Charlotte would be another one that I would give a shout to, kind of that same manner. Obviously, Kalina has a crazy run, which definitely boosted him. But even just seeing Ajiman progress throughout the season and being so solid for them was huge. And Orlando was a team that I forget before the season, everybody's like, yeah, Supporter Shield.
Yeah,
and
they finished second last year in the East.
Exactly. And obviously I was all in on Luis Muriel, Colombian. I'm just like, man, there's going to be so many things going on here. And then it's like they caught a flat tire midway through and you're like, oh, this team is not good. But credit to Pareja, like he was able to kind of get them going again in the important moment. And they made a run to the conference final. And it hurts for them, obviously, because that's a stage that they want to surpass. But at the same time, it is credit to the way that the season kind of progressed to see how they were able to kind of manage those ups and downs and get there. How it looks going forward, I don't know. That Facundo Torres news is out there now. So, we'll see how that continues for them. But, I mean, I think they definitely deserve credit for the way that they kind of bounce back at the end for sure.
They're one of those clubs where if you put it on paper, it would look one way. Had never won a playoff game before. Then under Pareja, they've won playoff games, progressed to the second round, won U.S. Open Cup, second in the standings, a little bit of a Champions League run, not long, but they got in. They went toe-to-toe with Tigres, some big teams. If they sell Facundo Torres, to sell a big-time player. But then when you watch it, it doesn't feel the same way. It feels like they've come up short a lot because it's felt like they are capable of more. They're a bizarre club, and I think they're one where I wouldn't be shocked if outside of Facundo Torres and this big money, right? It's a very similar team next year. I also wouldn't be shocked if it's new coach, new squad, new spine. Like they could go completely either way because it's just in the eye of the beholder, and that beholder is their owner and what they decide they feel coming out of this year.
No, I 100% agree. The one thing I would say is like, I feel like they probably thought this year was such a golden chance. As you look the way the East panned out, like you think Miami's going to run the table. Okay, Miami's out. You think Columbus is going to run the table. Okay, Columbus is out. Cincy kind of flames out. And then you're like, oh, we're the ones. We're supposed to be next up. And you're like, there's no world where you feasibly saw the 7 seed Red Bull kind of make that run and get to MLS Cup. Like at least getting to MLS Cup would have felt like more of an accomplishment than not getting there, obviously. And even if they would have lost or won against the Galaxy. But you're right. It feels like this team is such in the middle part where it could go either way and you don't know. But I feel like we might be having the same conversation. Like they go into the offseason, they make a few moves, and the potential is there for them to once again be a top 4 team in the East and be among, I think, those top teams because the talent is there. They just, they like you said, they keep falling short. But it's obviously everybody wants that instant, like, come on, we need to have that gratification. Yeah. Like teams fall short all the time. It's
look at Greg Vanny and LA Galaxy. Yeah.
It's a hard league to win in. So I understand that sentiment for sure. Let's go on the opposite end. And there's a team or teams that disappointed you the most.
I was pretty high on FC Dallas coming into this year. I thought they had a hole at center back, but otherwise I felt pretty confident about a lot of the pieces they had put together. And Jesus Ferreira had his worst year since he's emerged as a full professional. Paul Arriola found his feet for times, but not enough to probably be a DP in this league, which is part of the problem. Paxton Pomykal can't get healthy, and it didn't take Petar Musa long, but I think he's a center forward, and there's only so much a player at that position can do. And so for them to not even contend for a playoff spot after I think I had them picked third in the West going into the season, I think that's a huge disappointment where you look at a lot of the other clubs that fell, by the wayside, and I don't think there's huge expectations on them. Philadelphia would be the other one. But again, obviously, eye of the beholder, what they decided was one thing, but they went to a Leagues Cup semifinal this year and they contended and it felt like they were going to make the playoffs all of a sudden with a week left to go in the season. So I think for me, Dallas, just the way they limped through the year and sort of fell apart and were never relevant is more upsetting than these other teams that had these ups and downs.
Yeah, no, that's a good shout. My two in the West, St. Louis, and obviously last year wasn't going to be sustainable. Like they just blew expansion year out of the water, and it was credit to what they did. And I thought Bradley Carnell was a big part of that. And then, this season happens, he gets fired, and you're like, oh man. But talent-wise, like I thought they had enough talent to compete and be competitive in the West. And we saw towards the end of the season, they kind of got that form again. But yeah, I just thought like going from such a high to really a low where you fire your coach mid-season, it hurt for them. And it was a little disappointing, although, like I said, I think they kind of hit that little bump at the end, kind of like Orlando, where it gives you hope for them being competitive next season, depending on what type of direction they go with. And then the homer New England in me is going to say the Revs because I did not expect them to be a great team in MLS this year. But if you look at the Revs roster when the season started, based on talent, you're like, this is a really good soccer team. And because they had the players there and even making certain moves, they brought in Langoni, and you're like, this team could have been very competitive in the East that, once again, was very top-heavy with 4, maybe 5 teams, if that. And then after that was like a free-for-all. Yeah. And they just they couldn't get anything done. And I don't know if it's a Caleb Porter thing, if it's a personnel thing. A lot of things obviously have to change there, but I was disappointed in the fact that they just didn't put up a fight. And it seemed like that from very early on. Like it wasn't like, oh, maybe they'll give a little bit of false hope. They had a little bit of a success in CONCACAF in the early go before the season started, and then like everything kind of just went downhill. So it's hard when you have a player like Carlos Hill. You have somebody like Dylan Barrero who's now no longer there. I mean, the talent is there, but if you don't have a 9 that could actually score goals, it's tough. But like Chankalai, Hill, Langoni, like talented players that if you look at it from an attacking perspective, for sure could give you some fits. But then the other half of the field defensively, they weren't too good. Then they trade DeJuan Jones. I mean, it's really weird. It's a weird dynamic for me for a team that we like to talk about this all the time. Not too long ago was winning a Supporters Shield and setting MLS records. So that was a little crazy to me. But to this point, what was the stat? The last 3 teams to win MLS Cup did not make the
Yeah.
playoffs the year before, right?
Yep.
So
So you can have belief. If you are a bad team, believe that it can turn around, which I think is another staple of MLS, which is as much as it feels like this huge gap between the good and the bad teams. And maybe it looked this way this year with the Galaxy putting up 5 goals and Miami blowing teams out in Columbus as well. The gap is small. Like if you make a few right moves, you get yourself in the right situation. 1, you can make a Red Bull like run, or 2, you could turn things around pretty fast. So yeah, a lot of hope for a lot of teams. I don't know if the Revs are one of them, but it would be a pretty good year for them.
I didn't mention them for that reason. It was definitely not a segue, but I will say that Bruce Arena versus Greg Berhalter, Earthquakes Fire MLS Cup is going to happen next year. So
Yes, all right, I'm here for that. I am so here for that. Also, Chicago in December. That's the dream.
Woo! Come on, man. And speaking of next season, what are you looking forward to, man? Because this is like, I love that the predictions become such a big thing in MLS, because this is probably one of the hardest leagues to predict or moments or things. But we have San Diego coming in, who expansion draft should be happening very soon here. What are you looking forward to next year? Obviously, Messi in Miami is a huge storyline, but now seeing the CONCACAF draw, adding Club World Cup on top of that, adding whatever Leagues Cup will look like, adding whatever participation MLS has an Open Cup, like this is, it's gonna be another crazy year, and it's gonna happen very quickly.
Yeah, we're never gonna sleep. That's definitely gonna be a big one. I think I can't imagine what the results will look like, but watching Seattle in that Club World Cup group with PSG, Atletico Madrid, and I think Al Ahly, that's going to be wild. All at CenturyLink, like you're going to turn it on and be like, "Oh, it's a summer friendly." I've watched these before, and it's like, "Oh, this game matters." No way. So that's going to be fascinating to watch, and it sounds like they're making some moves to try and improve themselves heading towards that. So that'll be like, I think just for me as someone who always cheers for the MLS team in CONCACAF competition, like this is times 100, and then of course Inter Miami as well playing in it. I think that's going to be really cool, really special. Expansion teams are always fun, a new fan base to come into the league, expand the footprint. Now you're going to have rivalry games with LA for San Diego. You throw San Jose into that as well. We think the way this San Diego team is going to run is going to be different than what we've seen other teams. They're connected to this Right to Dream Academy based out of Africa originally that bought a team in Denmark just to move players to sell them and ended up becoming a Champions League club. But like they're going to push young players. They're going to push young, skillful, open game. Like that's who they are at their core. And they're going to see if it works in MLS. So I think finding that out is going to be fun. I also, to me, the more diversity of styles and club building and style of play in the league is better. So I think that's really exciting. I'd say the thing that's most encouraging to me about next year is I think Atlanta, Chicago, and Toronto are all sleeping giants. And I think they have the right people in place to put them back where they belong. Atlanta, it's not as long and it's not as, it's pretty obvious. Carthago has been there now a bit and has spent big money and all of that, but that's a club that should be averaging 45, 50,000 fans a game. That should be playing in huge playoff games with expectations. And so for them to have fallen away from that is frustrating. I think Carthago is the right guy. You mentioned the Chicago Fire and Greg Berhalter. Like, say what you want about Greg Berhalter and the U.S. men's national team. The guy's won in MLS. He knows what he's doing. He's been around the game. For anyone who thinks, how does he get a job or any of some ridiculous stuff like that, like Club America offered him their job. We're talking about the biggest club in the region said, we want you to take over this. I know there were people at some of the bigger clubs in MLS that were thinking of bringing him in over the last year or two, including in Europe as well. So I think he's the right guy. And while we don't know who it is in Toronto right now, the fact that Bill Manning and John Herdman have stepped down, I think is a positive for the club. And I think now they've got a chance to rebuild, because I think the best moments of my life in MLS have been at Toronto. When they bump, when that city is connected, when that team is good, it's nothing like I've ever experienced in this league. And so they need to get back to that.
Love it, man. Yeah, I love the shot of Atlanta. Atlanta, I feel like they have, I don't want to say a blank canvas, but a almost blank canvas in front of them to work with, and offloading so much talent that they did this year. And they know they have that expectation of what they kind of set the bar very, very high when they came into MLS. And now it's like, all right, let's try to get back to that. The stadium that, like you mentioned, if places get bumping and going, you don't want to go there when that place is rocking for sure. And Chicago, to me, like you mentioned, I think that's probably the most intriguing storyline because there's a feasible way that Chicago is a team that's like middle of the pack in the East, and you're like, how did this
Yeah.
happen? And a lot of teams get into the playoffs anyway, so
Right.
you don't have to be a high seed. Look at the Red Bulls; they're proof of you being able to get into the playoffs and potentially turn up. I think Greg Berhalter is going to be the biggest storyline to follow and see kind of how Chicago gets built out. And he knows, man, the pressure's on, but he also, like you mentioned, has that experience. And I think it's a challenge he took on for a reason. So it's not like he's coming in a little hesitant of what he wants to do. I think he has a really clear idea of what direction he wants the Fire to go in, and he's gonna try that right from the beginning. I'm excited to see how that works out, man, for sure.
I want to spend some money. They're going to spend some money.
They're going to spend bread for sure. Absolutely. It's not going to be like Philly where it's like, we don't want to do this, and then be like, damn, why didn't we get past the hump? Like, they'll spend the money for sure. I want to ask you a really important question. How many tacos did you eat over the weekend in LA?
Not enough. I'll say that, but a lot of good ones. It is the elite part of LA. Every corner, it feels like. It's amazing. I mean, you drove in an Uber with me where I was like, we could stop there or there or there. And it was 45 minutes of me saying that. I love that part of the food out there. I cannot lie.
In true East Coast fashion, though, we were crushing pizza on Friday instead, drinking beer, which is great. I'll give you the floor now for your basketball talk. The Knicks got eliminated from the NBA Cup. Shout out to Goss, man. He pulled up to the MLS media festivities on Friday, the day before the Cup, in his Knicks hat, and I was like, oh man, he has a Knicks hat out. That's dope. We always go back and forth because I am a fan of the reigning NBA champion Boston Celtics. Yeah. You weren't aware of that. Now you are. But hey, man, y'all lost in the quarterfinals of the NBA Cup last year, and you guys y'all didn't do anything either.
Nice. Yeah, we're trying to save legs. We thought that it was the right thing to do for the growth of the league to let some of the small other teams have these high pressure moments, because we play at MSG every day, which is, as everyone knows, the Garden, because it is the mecca of basketball. It's the center of the sport. And so it's nice to let other people get a platform. So I thought it was courteous. I thought it was respectful. And that's why I love my Knicks.
Hey, man, from experience, the NBA Cup is overrated. We didn't want to go to Vegas.
There you go.
And we still got the championship.
Yeah.
Man, so that's all that matters. Guys, my brother, thanks for coming through, man. It's always a pleasure to kick it, to chop it up. It was a great weekend here. It inadvertently ended up hanging out with you and Tom the whole weekend, which was great because I was just trying to find a way home on Saturday and ended up being a man of taste, drinking a great beer in downtown LA and having a good time. So thank you for coming through for the pod. Like I said, tap into Soccerwise, check them out, follow the channels, YouTube, Twitter, follow my boy Empire Gas on the socials. Follow the show, Kicking the Real on YouTube. I am wearing the Galaxy Retro. If you're watching, this is nice. This is a Mitchell and Ness piece right here. I had to pull this one out for the Galaxy fans, and the LAFC fans, please do not be in my mentions talking shit. Guys, man, appreciate you. Enjoy the little bit of time the offseason that you may get. One last thing, I think that you and Tom should recreate the Ricky Pooch and Diego Fagundes being rolled around.
Yeah,
that's all I'm gonna say. I think that'd be a good moment for the show.
The only problem is Diego and Ricky were similar size, and I'm up here and Tom's down there. But listen, I'm sure Tom will be happy to start with the cigar part. I live in Miami now. I love it. I came out of that locker room and everyone's like, oh, it smells like cigar. I'm like, yeah, it's gross. And like we all walked away and I was like, yeah, wink, wink, for sure. How gross. So I'm in favor of it.
That's right. My guy's a Florida man now, man. My way of me, bro. Hey, brother, thanks again, man. It's a pleasure. Thanks for tapping in, everybody. I will see y'all the next time. Peace.